Brown says, get that India, big boy.
Call an ambulance! Maybe call a priest! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell Killer!
Well, welcome to Parramatta Eels Club, everyone. Unfortunately, we wish it could be better circumstances for talking about this match between the Eels and the Storm. It's not such a great result. That's an understatement. We are the Cumberland Throw. We cover all things Parramatta Eels from the juniors all the way through to the NRL. As I said, welcome to Parramatta Eels Club, the home of the Eels. But John, after watching that, I think the word embarrassment is an understatement. It's very, very difficult to try to find anything at all where we can find a positive from that game from the Eels.
Yeah, considering the scoreline was 16-10 heading into the halftime break, the Eels had fought back from a deficit to get themselves in a position to compete in the second half. What we saw in that second stanza, I think by saying embarrassing 60s, it's being generous. It was a catastrophic failure at pretty much every level, from coaching to playing to training.
Yeah, when we're looking at that, to put it into perspective, the Eels went into the second half, as you said, just 6 points down, and with Cameron Munster out of the game. Now, coming into the game, both teams were without their halves and their fullback, and then when the Storm lost Munster, you had to think that the Eels were some sort of chance of making a fist of that second half. Instead, what we saw was a complete capitulation.
Yeah, the absurdity of the idea that Melbourne lose their best player, they get better, we get worse from that point in the game. Like I said, it's so out there that you'd be accused of being an idiot to suggest it in a neutral setting, yet we just saw it. Melbourne went to several higher levels. Parramatta dropped their marbles and suddenly forgot how to defend, how to structure their attack, how to do basic football.
Yeah, it was... Look, to me, we got into the realms where it was an insult to the jersey, what we saw today. To me, what we witnessed was far worse than what happened in Darwin in the game against the Dolphins. I mean, we could look at that game against the Dolphins and there weren't any excuses, but we were upset about the fact that the game was being taken up to the tropics and that the Eels are in a pattern of losing games every time we go up to Darwin for the last 3 years. But there's no excuses there. What we've seen in this Magic round so far has been really good games.
Entertaining football.
Entertaining and competitive games. The Eels have been the sole team, with one game to go as we record this, to embarrass themselves, to capitulate, to literally provide nothing for their supporters. I feel for anyone, and I know there are Eels supporters who travelled up to Brisbane for Magic Round, and I really feel for those supporters. I mean, I know it's not possible, but you'd think, well, the club should be refunding their travel plans and their expenses, their accommodation. That's silly stuff to suggest it, but you almost feel like it was that sort of performance.
That kind of energy, 100%, yeah.
Yeah, so, John, I mean, we could break this game down and look at some of the stats, but I'm really not too sure that there's any point in that, because the eye test tells you just how poorly we played.
Oh, without a doubt. Obviously, individually, I think you're going to struggle to find a player that had a net positive game without some serious caveat when it comes to missed tackles or errors. But the most interesting stat for me, 60s, was that in terms of the sheer possession stakes, the Eels and the Storm split the ball perfectly even, 50% apiece, and the Eels had a slight edge in time of possession, about plus 14 seconds in their favour. So it's not like Melbourne engulfed them in possession with a tidal wave of the ball in hand. The Eels had their opportunities, just executed terribly. And I suppose it comes back to the point that we've banged the drums about our issues with recruitment and retention and how we've shaped our top 30 this year. Given who Melbourne had out prior to this game and in this game itself, this is a loss that, you know, the players, the trainers and the coaching staff, I think, have to own in their own right.
Yeah, so if we look at them owning it, then going forward they have to own it. And by that I mean there has to be changes. Where do you start?
I mean, who's been good for one drop a game at least the last 3 or 4 games out there on the left edge? And we were surprised he was picked this week, but Sean Lane, another costly drop this week where it was put in the breadbasket. It was a crash ball. They're always difficult, but that's why you're paid handsomely to handle those situations with aplomb. He drops it again. Melbourne get off the hook in a key attacking situation there. Matt Dury's been kicking down the door in New South Wales Cup for, the last 2 games have been exceptional, but prior to that I think he's been really solid. So I think you look at the left edge, there's one easy change there, but I think there's a whole swathe of candidates where you could look for legitimate change through the forward pack into the back line.
Well, we had a New South Wales Cup team that's now won, 4 of their last 5.
And the one loss was that absurd 9-1 penalty count against them where they still managed to make it a 6-point game.
Yeah, so today a 36-14 win for the New South Wales Cup team.
Too good for the Magpies.
Matt Dury impressing with a couple of tries, really great lines. Young Matt Arthur Budsey, again, outstanding at dummy half. We had the halves combining well in that game.
Sanders and Lynn, yep.
Yes. Coming into next week, a chance of Clint Gutherson playing. Looks like no chance with Mitch Moses playing. Playing against a South Sydney team that actually put up a decent effort against the Cowboys. You know what my fear is this coming week against South?
Yeah, well, you look at the competing form lines in terms of their last starts, and yes, the Eels were competitive against the Manly Seagulls and against the Brisbane Broncos, but you're only as good as your last start. It's one of those, favourite idioms of the code. And last start, the Rabbitohs were competitive against the Cowboys, who can be mercurial, but they made it a 1-score game. Eels just got blown off the park by the Melbourne Storm, by the understrength Melbourne Storm.
John, I'm always a glass half full person. And you mentioned their improved performances or decent efforts against the Sea Eagles and against the Broncos. But when you have a game like, when it's bookended by performances against the Dolphins and the Storm that we saw today, as far as I'm concerned, you can wipe out any decent effort, any bad luck in those games against the Sea Eagles and the Broncos, because the fact that stares you in the face is that we look like a wooden spoon team this year, because the wooden spoon team will actually have games where they look not too bad, like this is a decent effort, and it's easy then for supporters to fall into the trap, as we did a little bit last week, of focusing on the positive that we saw in that game against the Broncos. And it hurts to say this as a supporter, but this is an instant reaction. It's meant to be raw. My raw reaction right now is, as an Eels supporter, I was offended by that game.
I think, given the context of those prior games, we were perfectly fine to rationalise the incremental improvement that we saw, better game planning, better first half results, and then that second half turning of the tide. But when you make those incremental steps and then parlay that into what we saw against Melbourne in Magic Round, like you said, it washes away any goodwill that you've seen manifest in those prior games, and suddenly you're not back to, step one, the first peg. You've gone back 3 steps, and now like you said, you're talking about wooden spoon contention more so than even just riding the ship in general. So yeah, the Parramatta Eels do have a serious issue here. They have to face some very nasty home truths about how they're handling the football, regardless of the roster, regardless of any issues of injuries. There is a certain way you have to carry yourself as an NRL team when it comes to being competitive and being in the contest, and they're not doing that right now.
The stat that surprises me, well, I'm not surprised by the missed tackle stat of 49 missed tackles to the Storm's 23. I am surprised a little bit by the ineffective tackles that were only listed as 27, because I got sick of looking at the Storm brushing through tackles, or sorry, I should just say standing in tackles and just offloading at will. because an ineffective tackle, we're talking about you fail to stop. You don't necessarily miss, but you fail to stop the ball from being moved on. And that seemed to be happening constantly throughout this game.
Yeah, defensively, this is just an ugly game to break apart 60s. You mentioned the inability to hit and stick in that initial contact and how Melbourne were able to...
What hit and stick? It was non-existent.
Exactly. The complete lack of Melbourne able to dominate with second phase football on the back of that. Our market defence was atrocious, allowing Harry Grant and the Melbourne Storm outside backs, including Far Longo fullback, to pick us apart. And then defensively, our edge structures, they actually started okay in the first half. Second half, just at sea. Just we weren't checking off responsibilities. If Melbourne turned the ball back inside, we weren't handling off the ball runner or the support runner effectively. It was an absolute dog's breakfast. And like I said, when they do the film review on this game, it's going to be a case of who actually did a positive thing rather than picking out the negative thing, because the bulk of the football that was played out there defensively was just atrocious.
I don't even know what you would do with doing a video review of this game. It was so horrendous.
Normally, I'd say you just flush it away. This is a game that you'd say there's nothing to be gained or bartered from it. But like I said, this team needs some nasty home troops right now. So if anything, they need to do the old Clockwork Orange and get the eyes taped open to watch the footage.
Yeah, and maybe that's the path that they should go down, because in all honesty, I wonder if there's been enough looking in the mirror by people, and I have to say, I think Brad has given too many players a free pass.
Yeah, too much leeway across senior players that, while we know they can be elite at their best, they have shown that they're miles off the pace right now.
Now, I mean, obviously we've banged on about this is a short roster and you haven't got choices, but I think right now there are most definitely choices that can be made. So let's just go back to you started talking about the choices on the left with Micah Sevo, Sean Lane, and mind you, I don't think they were our worst performers today, because there were some blokes on the right-hand side who...
we hold in high esteem, like Will Penasini, who I thought had very ordinary games. And it's difficult. Like we've made there's been a reason we've been banging the drums about the issues with the short roster, and that really played into it when your New South Wales Cup team starts the season, was it 0-4, 0-5 60s?
Yeah, I think it was at least 0-5, I'm sure.
And it wasn't just that, but they were looking ragtag.
Yeah.
Yet they've had the injection of youth, and they've built and they've taken their lumps, and now they're playing some very good football. And I think that between the young players there and then even the senior players that have held their heads up high in that turbulent period, there is a legitimate conversation about who should be coming in. Matt Dury, front of the queue there for mine on the left edge. Charlie Geimer, another young back row you could look at getting into the mix. Matt Arthur at dummy half, or at least in rotation with Lussick in first grade. On the wing gets tricky. Zach Sini, Ethan Martin, I think both of them are roll the dice. I'm not sure if there's a good fit. Jake Tungall's been solid though. Maybe he gets a look in. I just think that there's untenable positions in first grade right now, and maybe these guys aren't the short-term solution, but they're also not the present problem in the NRL team, so something has to change.
Look, I get the reluctance to change, because if you're looking at changing a winger like Sevo, and today, okay, he got that last try, but we're talking about 76 run metres today.
And that came largely in the depth of the contest, because at one point on the coverage, I think they were saying it was 6 carries for not even 30 metres for Micah Sevo. So he managed to pad the metres at the end when the game was well and truly lost.
But as I was saying, I understand that when you're looking at the reserve grade, when you're looking at players who actually sit outside the top 30, and you're talking about Isaac Lumi, you're talking about Ethan Martin. So Ethan is so raw, he's talented, but he's so raw, and he's only had a couple of games in the New South Wales Cup, I think 3 or 4 in total. He's played the last 2 games. Isaac Lumi, he's been used in first grade at other clubs. He's been used in first grade at the Eels. He sits outside the top 30. I don't know whether he's necessarily done enough to actually demand selection. So I don't know whether we're going to get a change on that side. Sean Lane needs a rest.
Yeah, there's no doubt he needs a chance to refocus, reprioritise how he's approaching his football. We know at his best. You mentioned in the podcast in the preview, 2022, we don't make the grand final without Sean Lane.
Yeah.
He carries so much of the burden in that season. A phenomenal player when he's switched on, but right now he's not in the right gear. He's not getting the little bits of the game right that he needs to. And going back to what you were talking about on the wing, I suppose if you're looking at it, if you're trying to delineate from the senior player to the unproven prospect, the argument you could make is that it's now past round 11, so you're free to use players outside the top 30. Would you rather have Micah Sivo making the same mistakes over and over, or would you rather have a rookie, the same way that Blaise Talangi's making mistakes at fullback, making mistakes on the wing but potentially being better for it? I don't know. It's difficult.
Well, I guess the question really comes down to, if Clint Gutherson is available this week, and there's a chance that he's available this week, do you then leave Blaise at fullback, put Gutho into the centres, and therefore push
Sean
one
Russell.
of the centres like Sean Russell back out to the wing? Now, Sean was having his issues out on the wing, but he was also having issues today in being able to get the ball from out to Sivo, and then that's to be fair to Sivo.
Yeah,
as well.
I don't think there's an elegant solution to this, coming back to the whole idea of our roster not being balanced as properly as it could be. And yeah, I don't think there is a perfect way to solve this. So yes, if you put Gutherson into the centres, that is something that I would entertain, because we're talking about making the club better in the long term now. I mean, realistically, we're not making the finals. Mathematically, obviously, we're still in there. You could go on a big win streak and put yourself back into the hunt. But being realistic, you're talking about season 2025. And if you're talking about season 2025, it's about being better in the spine, being better in your core positions. That means Blaise Talangi, continuing to learn on the job at fullback.
Now, I want to ask you about degrees of... I'm trying to think of the right term. There's no such word as horrificness, but if there were such a word as horrificness, in terms of degrees, what was the worst? Was it what was happening around the ruck, or was it what was happening on our right edge?
I will go with the ruck, and it's probably closer than it should be, because we've sort of looked to our right edge as the far more consistent and safer side of the two when it comes to defensive issues. And it's not to say they've been blameless, but Simonson and Penaseni have had less issues than whatever mix of centre and wing we've had on the left this year. But when I look to the ruck, the fact that we're getting caught out by multiple teams now from dummy half, our inability to not win the wrestle simply because we've not been a strong wrestling team under BA as part of a prerogative to not give away penalties. But we're not locking into marker, we're giving up big meters. And when your team is built to win the middle, it is incredibly frustrating to watch guys consistently not just be bad in defence, but also struggle in attack when they should be setting the tone there. So yeah, I'm going to say issues around marker and the ruck really are the bugbear for me out of those two that you presented.
So does that then suggest to you, I mean, we're talking about Matt Arthur maybe getting a run, but that's only addressing probably, and we're talking about him probably coming off the bench.
Yes.
Right, rather than throwing him into a starting position. But, I mean, how many changes would you make to the pack? Because we've suggested Sean Lane needs a rest, but there were issues around the middle with our middle forwards and their defence, their capacity to react to what Harry Grant was doing out there. Harry Grant was playing with them. He was just toying with them. Mm-hmm. And the number of times the runners, as we said before, were just able to stand in tackles or to be pushing through tackles and find an offload. The tries today from that were just so soft.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I said earlier, I don't think there's an elegant solution here. If I'm in charge of the team, yes, Sean Lane's sitting out for a week or two depending on when he finds form in Cup.
He can't be the only. He
No,
can't be the only one, can he?
I think Makahesi Makatoa played himself out of a jersey this week, getting steamrolled by Elias Aikatoa en route to also then getting beaten by Harry Grant in the same sequence of plays that led to a big try there. I think Reg was okay today on the back of being good last week. Couldn't back it up as much as I would have liked. I thought Joe Fungahi was probably one of the better forwards to start. I think Junior even needs to sit like Lane or get the missive that your primary directive is to run the ball, not to offload. There was a point when the game was lost, but Jermaine Hopgood had found a channel to offload the Junior, and instead of his first directive being run for the try line, it was skip and offload, and that's just not what you want from your big man. So I'll be looking probably thereabouts for the changes. Luca Moretti came in and did a job today, but he wasn't the primary choice, and that was Ryan Madison. So you make that change probably. And beyond that, I don't know how many changes you can make, because like you said, it's difficult. Wholesale changes probably just lead to a different problem.
So does the label of part-time players stick to this group?
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
we got a complete clock off against the Dolphins. We had slightly elevated performances in the following 2 weeks, and we had again a complete clock off today.
I would argue that it's not even part-time footballers now, it's faders, because they've consistently started the first half of these last few contests with intent and the ability to test the opposition. The moment it gets to oranges, they completely clock off. So, if anything, they almost don't need halftime to happen, because whatever's happening is a complete reversion from being competitive to being reserve graders.
Now, here's a question for you as well, and it's difficult for me to comment on it, but I've been inundated with messages about we don't look fit enough. And I get that happens. It looks like it's happening when one team starts to get all the momentum and the other team's not good enough to stop that momentum, that they start to look really, really ordinary. But I'm wondering if it's going to be possible to delineate between the team not being fit enough or that collection of older players who just don't seem to have that energy that's required in the NRL these days. No doubt, when you look at the first half, we're trying to play more of an up-tempo game. We're trying to move the ball, but I don't think we've got the personnel to be able to move the ball, and I think it's also making our older players look older and slower as well.
Yeah, you raise a fantastic point, and we don't have the sort of insights necessary to be able to, like you said, delineate between a lack of fitness or maybe just a lack of energy because we have a more seasoned forward pack. And in a way, again, not an excuse, but maybe partly an explanation, that's how important Mitchell Moses is to playing that style of football, because his ability to find the carpet, to flip field position and territory was critical to the Parramatta Eels in the way they want to play that brand of football. And while Mitchell Moses is out, I think that to some degree Dylan Brown has done a good job recreating his absence somewhat in the aggregate. But when it comes to these big moments, when it comes to beating the Sea Eagles, the Broncos and the Melbourne Storm in the second half, that is when you need, or at least the way we're set up, that is when you need a full halfback like Mitchell Moses. And I think that's probably the third prong of what you're suggesting there, is how much of it is fitness, and I think that's definitely legitimate. How much of it is the forward pack, again with their seniority, again legitimate, and how much of it is Mitchell Moses not been available. And I think that's probably the smallest of the three prongs, but I think that's also part of the equation.
So the reason I asked that question is I'm pretty sure that the sort of stats they were getting through the pre-season was that individually the players were producing better fitness statistics than the previous season. And it was a longer pre-season than normal.
Not interrupted by the World Cup, no.
Yeah, so, but I don't know. I mean, as I said, you look at the performance and the way we're fading in second halves.
The proof is in the pudding, isn't it?
You can't hide away from that.
No.
And I also get that when you start to have those incomplete sets and you allow and errors, and you allow the opposition to have so much ball that you're basically letting them dictate the terms, and then it all snowballs from there. One team gets to run downhill, the other team's running uphill. But the optics aren't good. They're just not good at all. And to be fair as well, we did look rudderless today.
Oh, yeah, and like I said, this is a result that reflects, I think, equally on coaches, trainers and players. I mean, as we saw for the last two contests, in it right up to our eyeballs for the first half, completely fall away in the second half. So how much of that is player fitness, player focus, game plan? Again, difficult for us on the outside looking in to attribute to a singular aspect, and I don't think it's as simple as lumping it all on one party. But the reality is, when you lose the way we're losing, fans are going to be upset and call for blood, and I don't know how to apportion the blame correctly, but like I said, all three parties are definitely culpable.
Well, we know that the fans are going to be calling for BA's head after this.
Well,
I mean,
exactly. I mean, we know that that's the reality of being a coach. You know, you have a bad result go this way. While everyone is culpable and accountable, the first person that cops all the blame is the coach. And unfortunately for Brad, this is a result that doesn't reflect well, not just him, but his assistant coaches as well.
Okay, so what we're going to need to see, because that's not going to change this week, it's probably not going to change this year. What we need to see is change in the team. Where do we draw the line between a reactionary too much change in the team lineup and enough change that you can maybe instigate something better happening? Now, we should also point out, I think the Eels have got an atrocious record without Clint Gutherson. We've noted how poorly they perform as well without Mitch Moses, but we can't just keep saying that's an excuse. That's a reason. That's throwing up an excuse for the sort of performance that we saw today. There have to be players held accountable, and BA has to find some sort of balance between making players accountable as well as putting out a team that, I mean, for goodness sake, has to be competitive against the South Sydney Rabbitohs, of all teams. I mean, I know what my fear is next week with the Rabbitohs, because based on the two performances this weekend and the personnel that Melbourne had missing tonight, the Rabbitohs do a number on us if we turn up like that.
No doubt. And like you said, you've got to strike that balance between trying to catalyse a change that sparks the team and not, throwing out the entire, the vast swath of the team and sort of throwing people into the, fire, or rookies into the fire. I think right now, I don't know what the sort of combination that you'd be happy with is, but if I'm looking at changes, I think the three that need to happen, whether it's this week or across the course of the next 2-3 games, is Matt Doorey, without a doubt. I think, and then after that, the two rookies that we saw warm up last time out at Combank in Matt Arthur and Charlie Geimer. I think you've got to find a way to begin integrating them into the first grade team and giving them a chance to maybe not, rebuild the culture, because that's absurd, but maybe bring some youthful energy into the roster.
So if we just talk number, how many for you is an ideal number of changes? How many is too many?
I think on the back of what I was laying out there, 2 to 3 is probably within the acceptable range of not causing chaos in the roster just for the sake of... Not that's wrong to say for the sake of change, because clearly the team needs change. But beyond that, I think you start inviting other issues into the lineup that are going to cause a handicap against South Sydney because of mass change, rather than, getting underperforming players out and giving guys an opportunity.
Well, here's a question I haven't asked. How much did we suffer from the absence of Ryan Madison tonight around the middle?
Yeah, I think that's not to be slept on. Maddo, he hasn't endeared himself to fans with the, taking the suspension over the fine from that grand final loss. But the reality is that I think he does a lot of the ugly work in that second to third transitional period for the middle forwards that doesn't always get highlighted, but probably helps us stay in contests. And today, We didn't have that, and I think that's where Melbourne really took a foot forwards.
Well, he probably then accounts for at least one change to the middle, but I think we have to have one or two changes around the middle because we need that dummy half injection of Matt Arthur. We need someone who's going to do a bit more of the hit and stick around the middle. So I'm not talking about Ryan Madison coming in on an edge. I'm talking about him coming in
prop
on the middle. There just was such minimal impact from about the 30-minute mark from our middles tonight. We're talking about a change on the edge, maybe a change to the back line. So for mine, 4 changes I think are needed. I'll be happy with 3, but if it's only 1 or 2, it's not acceptable.
No, and I think it starts to invite very strong legitimate criticism about, the way we're approaching these contests, because like you said, I don't mind a coach backing his players and giving them opportunities to push through bad form.
Oh, you can't back what we saw tonight.
No, and that's
there
right.
There can be no support to that tonight.
There is definitely absolute limits or critical lines where you've been given your chance, your second chance, your third chance. It's time to get shipped out to Reggie's to, refocus and sort of find that balance again. So,
and we should point out as well, of course, that we're recording this straight after full-time live in Parramatta Leagues Club. We're not seeing any press conference, so we don't know what the response is straight after full-time. There can't be any kind words that are said. There won't be anything positive said, you would imagine, about effort, because again, it's a complete capitulation. It's an insult to all of us for the colours that we wear, for having all the things that supporters will say, look, this is the minimum that we deserve. Supporters are entitled to be not just upset but angry over what we saw tonight.
Yeah, the second half efforts harken back to an era of Parramatta football that you don't like to talk about. And it's where we sort of came from before Brad was at the helm, and it's not good times. So the coaches, the players, the trainers, everyone needs to have a very serious look at themselves, some serious introspection, some serious self-scouting this week, because like you said, we go into this game against the Bunnies and we're not favourites. We're not even close to it. So without serious looks in the mirror and some home truths and hard words, and then not just that, but then acting on that in the right manner, I think the Eels are in for a very long week.
Well, mate, I don't know if there's too much more that we can add, because we're probably just going to be repeating our thoughts and opinions on things. Thank you to our listeners that have turned up tonight. And I guess all I can say is we hope for better times. We'll be back here in a couple of weeks for the, I think it's the Sharks
game, correct,
game, which is a Thursday night, so we'll be on before the game. Pre-game show then. Thank you, everyone, as I said, for turning up. And I have to say it. I still have to say, go you mighty Eels. Good night, everyone. Thank you.